Yeah. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Francis. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Internet Society Barbados chapter. And welcome to the panel on Internet and Activism, Democracy and Economics. So we'll just give a brief introduction of my distinguished and illustrious panelists this morning. And I'll start to my right with Dr. Pearson Broom. Dr. Broom is a lecturer in political science and program coordinator for the MSc e-Governance for Developing Countries. He received his PhD from the University of Cambridge in Information Technology and Economic Development. He has diverse working experience in the Caribbean and has served as a consultant for the UNDP, the Commonwealth Secretariat, and the CSM unit and CARICAD, among others. To my immediate left, he certainly needs no introduction, Mr. Jeremy Stevens. Jeremy is a goal-oriented, innovative, and dynamic individual with experience in finance, technology, academia, venture capital, and private equity in Barbados and across the Caribbean. He once maintained the premier economic forecasting model in Barbados very early in his career and served as business advisor to a leading Barbadian venture capital fund. His current focus is on the marriage of software development and finance, specifically in the area of web apps. To Jeremy's left, we have Krystal Howell. Krystal is an internal audit manager with Sagicor Life, Inc., with qualifications as a chartered professional accountant. She currently serves as a secretary and has served as past governor for the Institute of Internal Auditors at Barbados chapter. Krystal has recently been a key figure behind social media awareness campaigns, helping to demystify the Auditor General's report and to break down several burning topics with expert guests, including government ministers. The topics have included the Barbados ratings and their impact, the national budget and estimates, and understanding hedging. And to Krystal's left, we have Mr. Patrick Salt Bellamy. He is a Barbadian DJ, radio personality, and social commentator. He has been with Slam 101 FM since its inception in 2010. And he produces the well-known call-in programs On a Rail and What Drives Me Crazy. He is moderator of the Central Bank of Barbados' Economic Forum and is known as a social commentator and for having a finger on the pulse of Barbados, especially its younger generation. We are awaiting one other panelist, but when she comes, I think she had a slight accident, but she's still committed to being here this morning, and when she comes, I will introduce her. So we'll start with Dr. Pearson Broom.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here to present on this whole idea of, internet, activism, democracy, and economics. Now, since I lecture on e-governance, I'll take the side of democracy and chime in when I have to with reference to the econ if I have to. Everyone now, as we know, is on social media of some form. And a colleague and I, Dr. Adugo and I, we did a paper on why internet activism is not taken off with some of the same objectives as those in other places. So you would have heard of the Arab Spring. You would have seen Occupy Wall Street. You would have seen the protests in Hong Kong, etc. But in spite of all of our technology around us, we within the Caribbean are still quite lazy with reference to how we promote and think about democracy, etc., and activism. I'm going to go through some of these quite fast, but this table here is going to give you an idea in comparison with what other regions are looking like and how they are involved in digital activism. And you can see the Caribbean at the, well, not too far from the bottom, has, it's not that active here within the Caribbean. And when we look at why we're using it, the usual, reconnecting old friends, making possible the whole high school reunions, etc., dating. Pretty much we're using it for entertainment purposes. And this pie chart pretty much says the same thing too. We've not been really using the networks for, in a number of ways, productive purposes, as you see within other major regions, for example. And we know that technologies can go very far in what they can do. They can empower people, include people. It allows for mass participation, etc. And importantly, it has been useful in breaking the stranglehold on the traditional media. Everyone now fancies him or herself as a citizen journalist. And they are now able to circumvent the media because the media can be gatekeepers. When you send a letter to the editor can decide whether they want to put it in the newspaper or not. You can now have your own blog and decide, well, look, I don't care about you anymore. I am just going to be here, and you can be a rabble-rouser. So it has allowed now greater form of participatory democracy and direct democracy. It has broken up newspaper sites as well. I don't think the Nation newspaper, one of the media houses here, for example, is as, that selling point every Saturday was a gossip column. And that was undermined by a website which more or less threw all caution to the wind and ignored all libel and slander laws. So nowadays, the general public just went straight to the website and ignored the newspaper. So it has dumbed down a lot in that regard. So the technology is here to stay. But although we have this activism and there are prospects for it, there are still quite a few challenges. One of the challenges that we have with why it is not as integral as in some of the countries you see on television, for example. We have a number of obstacles in our way. For example, we don't have freedom of information legislation in a number of Caribbean countries. Again, libel and slander legislation, outdated, needs to be revamped. And then we also have to remember that the telecommunication companies, if you're a true activist and you want to organize a process, the whole pay-as-you-go package access to data, for example, can also be an obstacle. And you know, for example, several people here, you send a message, it doesn't go through, oh, I wasn't near Wi-Fi. You can't afford the packages, etc. And this whole idea with digital literacy without civic literacy, increasingly what has happened is that, yes, you can manipulate the technology quite well, and you know its entrails equally as well. However, the challenge is, oftentimes you don't understand some of the fundamental issues that you're involved in, the general public. And if that has led to a lot of misinformation, fake news, etc. And people being easily manipulated by those who have access to the knowledge. Then one of the other concerns here is that there is no messiah in the crowd. Yes, you're an activist. You all have something you want to complain about. But who's leading that charge? Who's the one galvanizing and building consensus online in order to advocate for the change that you want? That is a problem. And then you also have to be able to recognize that the technology decentralizes knowledge. And the other concern is that because you have this activism going on, in face-to-face communication, there's order and protocol. Online now, there's no protocol and order. Everyone has a voice. And if you don't get your say, for example, you have the right to just ignore and go to another group, for example, because I don't like what you're saying. So there's no real formulation of the ideas in a coherent and logical way to convey what it is that you wish. The other concern that you also have to be able to think about is apathy colliding with pluralistic ignorance. Yes, you're an activist. You want greater democracy, for example. But you have a situation where you don't get buy-in from different groups. If you are advocating for lower taxes, but someone is saying, well, why am I going to bother? I got to live anyhow. There's that level of apathy. And the pluralistic ignorance, for example, would be persons who conform to a minority grouping. They don't see the need to be involved. Yeah, and how do we see the technology? Tools or toys in a number of instances. And just quickly, yes, we're activists and we want change, but we have not yet considered what type of democracy we want to see. Do we want big government or small government? Are we agitating to change structures? Are we agitating to change processes? Are we agitating to have more values within the society? Are we agitating to see prime ministerial power diminished? What are the features of the democracy that you are agitating against? And if we've not yet begun to conceptualize these things or think about them, the technology and the noise is being heard. It's not going to filter into a process of real, genuine, sustainable change. And it will be very much a continuation of a post-1930 situation where the middle classes, as usual, would come in and usurp whatever decisions are to be made and do things for themselves at the expense of the mob. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Broom, for laying the groundwork to our discussion this morning. I'll next move on to Mr. Jeremy Stephen.
All right, good morning to one and all. This is probably the quietest panel for such an early time in the morning. You're not having your coffee? Yeah, you need some coffee, especially as IT people. The way I want to tackle this, especially in line with the whole subject of the internet and activism, democracy, and economics, I want to at least go through at least a minute telling you why I chose to use the internet as a platform. Now, I don't know if some of you might not have known of me. That doesn't matter. But the whole thing is that for a number of years, I was speaking through the conventional media that Pearson spoke about. And a lot of that was just a case of the political atmosphere was willing. My predecessor at the Barbados Economic Society set a path where the presidents were expected to engage the media a lot more, and I was simply just doing my job. But then I had a trip to Southeast Asia last year that changed my life forever, between Indonesia and Singapore. And when you're a UE student, especially a UE economics student, you learn very much about why that Barbados and Singapore were on even keel in 1960. And then when you actually walk through the streets of Singapore and you see skyscrapers and you see people not being as productive as you would imagine, and the streets are clean, like I almost licked the street out there by Louis Vuitton. And the fact that they realized that space wasn't necessarily a constraint, but you can build buildings below the ground. So you got stores, like the same Louis Vuitton store was underground. You can walk right into a train station and then get off by a university, and you got your phone and you can see all your classes, and the smart city concept is there. Look, it was blowing my mind. And to imagine that both countries started off with similar resources, and I would even say Singapore had a harder deal outside of slavery. Singapore had a harder deal in 1960, a backwater, Most of its people weren't even nearly as educated as Bajans, and the Malaysians were really trying to choke it. They used to starve them of water, all of that stuff. Oh, 3 minutes already, imagine that. So I sat at the Changi airport and decided, you know what I'm seeing in Barbados isn't even nearly good enough. I understood the differences. And Facebook Live would have just opened up in Barbados. And I said, look, let me take a chance, because the internet would allow me to reach people who typically the nation don't necessarily care about. I will call the name, right? They don't necessarily care about. And the advocate don't necessarily care about, and that's the youth. And my thing was that there was a big separation between those who were just doing something for a degree up here versus those who actually were at risk. I cared more about them. So I decided to just start talking. And hence why I choose a simplified way of talking, not to talk down to anybody, but literally economics is just like medical sciences. It could be as complex as you want it to be. A hurt arm is a hurt arm, if you get where I'm coming from. So that was the motivation behind it, and I see a lot of power behind being able to communicate directly with audiences. But you've got significant challenges that I imagine the moderator will point us towards as the conversation goes on. One of them is net neutrality, or a challenge against that. In the Caribbean, I cannot believe that there are entities, and I won't call their names specifically because they've got employees in this room, right? But they're actually against the whole idea of net neutrality, trying to monitor WhatsApp, trying to throttle access to Facebook. But yet, the whole idea behind sharing, behind growth, the fact that you can point to academic studies that show there's a direct correlation in growth opportunities provided by the internet and the national economy, even if you've got a sense of dissent through online forums, it does not necessarily mean that the status quo can be overthrown. Pearson's research even points to that. So the main point is that you just want to continue making it easy to educate people. And I at least figure, for at least my sake, that that's the main plus to having an open internet or net neutrality in the Caribbean. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeremy. On next to Krystal Howell.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I would have had a bit of a different background to Jeremy, as I would not have been in the public eye when I first launched my social media campaigns. I am a qualified accountant and auditor, and I would have spent a lot of time observing the information that was disseminated by the bodies that I am a part of. And I noticed that most of the information was going to persons who already knew about what they were talking about. It was a conversation amongst peers, and I found that there seemed as though nothing was coming of it. You have a discussion, it's a fantastic discussion, you have great ideas, and they put them forward to the appropriate bodies, and then it seems to die there. And one of the most disheartening statements that I've heard, many of the persons say, is that, because some of them would have considerable age on me, you would have been having these discussions for 20, 30 years, and you're not seeing any change. They're not being implemented. Nothing is happening. And I wanted to see if I could find a way to go outside of the traditional mediums. And I saw that a lot of people were using the Facebook Live videos. I find myself to be an IT novice, which is ironic being here on the panel. But I figured if these people can take this medium and be able to use it to promote some of the most basic of things. You have persons using it to sell food, to sell clothing, to promote their products, to promote their services. Why can't I use this to be able to promote something that has an impact on every single citizen of Barbados? Because you may or may not like a particular brand of clothing, you may or may not like a type of food, but at the end of the day, you are impacted by the decisions that are made by the government. And it is very difficult to be able to see how you can get something on that level that is so highly specialized into a medium where persons, the average person, can pick this up and not only understand it, but sit through it. Because it's not something that you can easily break down into, say, a 5-minute segment. And even 5 minutes in social media land sometimes is too long. But having that ability to be able to break it down to a 30-minute and have people still engaged. I am thankful that I was able to do that because I am glad that persons are able to recognize and be able to make decisions in an informed manner as opposed to off of emotion or loyalty to a party that would have given them something in the past but no longer is able to do that.
Thank you, Krystal. Just before we move on to Mr. Bellamy, let me introduce our final panelist, Ms. Krystal Hoyt. Krystal is 18 years old, and she's the opposition leader for the Barbados National Youth Parliament and vice president of the Barbados Youth Development Council. She also sits on the CARICOM Youth Ambassadors Committee. She's a past Commonwealthian. All right, Jeremy.
We're still dope. We're still dope. Up and on.
Patrick, make sure you represent for us this morning. Thank you. Right. She's a past Commonwealthian, and she recently concluded her studies at the Barbados Community College, where she attained an associate degree in mass communications. Professionally, Krystal is a journalist and photographer for the leading online paper, the Barbados Today. Right. And she's passionate about young people, in particular policy and politics. And I said to our chair, Ashel, that I really wanted to get someone under 25 on this panel this morning, and thank you, Krystal, for accepting that. All right, so we'll move on to Mr. Bellamy.
Good morning, everybody. Internet, activism, democracy, and economics. Well, I get invited here as a DJ and a radio personality. To be quite honest, I am not really like too big on the. You lower me down? Oh, okay. I ain't too big on the internet activism. I feel as though a lot of the times is be preaching to the choir, but I do appreciate that the choir is a growing choir and that people are taking the internet activists a bit more seriously, and people are starting to get the messages from the internet activists and internalizing them. But what the problem comes is that sometimes they're not able to distinguish what is reality from what is fake. And sometimes, a lot of times, the messages, because there's no real structure around them, get lost in the delivery of the messages that is from certain internet activists. I think that the internet has indeed provided a platform/soapbox for a lot of people, but I can't get vexed with them because I got a radio show for the morning to be a platform/soapbox for myself, and everybody don't got that opportunity. So I'm actually grateful for the internet for being able to provide everybody who wants one of those to be able to have one, but I'm also very wary that everybody has one now, and you got to be careful with that. I see that we're going to need a transition. I'm seeing a transition now from people getting the news from the traditional sources to getting a lot of news from the social media and what's not. I think what we need to see is a transition now from internet activism to real life actions and things coming out of the internet activism now. The first contributor on the panel mentioned the putting on South, and I think that what the one point that was missing there was that's 3 minutes to go or 3 minutes that I used already. I ain't gonna tell all of them, but it was that they ran a story that people on the internet first got up in arms about, and then from there the pressure came into the general media, as opposed to something being reported in the mainstream media, and then people going on the internet and making a big hullabaloo about it. It was made a hullabaloo about first on social media, and then went over to mainstream media where it had a natural impact in the real world. And I think that's what we need to see more of. General everyday citizens, unfiltered, but still with some sort of structure. And thank you.
Good morning. Morning. Right. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So, internet, activism, democracy, and economics. And where do young people fit in all of this? Well, I can say for sure that if anybody uses the internet, it's young people. Young people beat everybody else when it comes to using the internet. Young people primarily use internet and social media for communication. I wouldn't say that young people, that every young person utilizes the internet how they should. I think that many young people don't recognize that social media, whether it be Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, or YouTube, is a platform. Your social media is a platform where you get to voice your opinions. And I think that's something that young people don't utilize. It's not to say that all young people don't utilize it, because young people utilize social media to market their businesses. There's no Bajan female. Well, every Bajan female, upcoming female, is a makeup artist and has a makeup artist page. Almost every single one of them. And there's no young person who can promote a fete or a cruise better than our young people. You can't be our young people on marketing when it comes to that. So our young people do use social media as a platform. They use it to weigh in on issues. Look at the Life in Leggings movement. They use their social media platform in order to create a movement. Look at the recent budget. Every person on my Twitter was tweeting about the budget. And you found out information faster than you got it at Loop, Barbados Today, or anything, because they were on their social media platforms. So I would say that young people are engaging in social media and internet activism. Are they engaging in it as much as we'd like? No. When it comes to politics, young people are disheartened for the simple fact that many young people are spoken of, but never for. When we talk about young people in this country, we usually talk about young people as a problem. We never talk, we associate young people with crime. We don't ever see anything else. We paint all young people with the same brush. And that is the problem. And that is why young people are so disheartened when it comes to politics and refer to politics as politics. And we have a serious problem with transparency in our country. Young people feel as if when they're searching for information, some of the websites, we talk about e-governance, and some of the websites have not been updated in years. And that's the problem that young people face. Young people are upset, they want change. But young people don't feel as if they are being heard, even though we have all of these social media platforms, because we tweet, we post, we talk, we get upset when we have to pay education fees. We make long rants on Facebook, and then nothing comes of it. So yes, with the pudding and sauce, change happened. But young people are on social media every single day, and nothing changes. Nothing goes viral. The only thing that will go viral is when we are fighting and somebody posts that online. And that's sad to think that that's the only thing. From positive things from young people don't make front page. A young person in shackles is made front page, but a young person doing something positive, no. And that's the problem. And that's why we are trying to use our internet to create a voice. And that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Krystal. I know you see why we wanted someone under 25 to be on our panel this morning. We'll open up to the floor before I pose some questions of my own to the panel. And please remember to state your name and organization.
Yes. Good morning, Lisa Evanson, Evanson Strategy Consultants, Inc. I have a question, well, maybe a couple of questions, but I want to frame the situation very quickly. We have seen, as Krystal just said, that young people are using Twitter, Facebook, and various other media. We've also seen the sort of consolidation of the internet into these platforms. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and such. Now they are facing the EU and the United States wanting to bring in legislation to crack down on what they can show, what can be seen, particularly with live streams. Various cases in the United States and the fear of terrorism within Europe. has caused both of those large platforms, where those large countries, those large regions, where those platforms generally cater to the most, to want to crack down on them. How do we in Barbados and the Caribbean avoid a similar crackdown legislatively? Because if there's one legislation that might be picked up quickest, it's the latest one that the EU puts out. How do we avoid this so that the youth can continue to be online, people can continue to, we talk about the young generation, but I've seen e-gaming, people who literally earn livelihoods showing the games they play and reviewing them live, for example. All of those things have created an economy online, and those are all at risk because someone can shut them down. And it's not the first time the internet has faced this. It's not going to be the last time. But how do we avoid it in the Caribbean?
Thank you. Jeremy?
All right, so my take on it is that we've got legislation already in place that could be cracked down if more people wanted to be enforced. Or rather not enforced, but really want to crack down on it. Now, a good example would be the Computer Misuse Act. We've had an example up to about 2 years ago where it was alleged that someone was beaten in a certain parish at a certain cricket game. And, right, good. So, and social media activist of the time, I should say, because he no longer is active, decided that he was going to talk about it, and he basically said that he was glad. And as a result, had to spend a little time, not incarcerated, but in jail. So that did happen. So there's grounds for which a lot of people, like myself, like Krystal, if we barely call the wrong name at the wrong time, we could be highly monitored. I bet a lot of 18-year-olds weren't even aware that that happened. But it would give reason for them to be a little cautious. Everybody can't be like Natalie. Makes no sense chasing Natalie, for the so-called young people in the room, chasing down Natalie, when you might not get anything out of it. But someone with a so-called reputation, some 18-year-old with a reputation, probably with some good points, speaking a certain way, because you know we like well-spoken people in the Caribbean, all of a sudden, that act is thrown at them. So we're not any different with respect to America, and especially England more so than the rest of Europe in having that kind of legislation. But here's where my fear is. We aren't, given the current structure of the internet, we aren't, let's say, a center of activity. We depend very heavily on Florida. Well, more so recently, it seems like out of South America through Krystal. We depend very heavily on other regimes for censorship. So if, for instance, all of a sudden, and I will say this, in the United States or in Colombia, for instance, porn becomes illegal, then I'm sorry, because the most searched site in Barbados, if you check out Alexa, is Pornhub, outside of Google. Yeah, it's one of them porn sites. One of them porn sites. Pornhub is one of them. Yeah. Sorry, wait, you might, Jeremy, you might not have heard of it, but you've seen it. So, but some of my research has led me to, my actual academic research has led me to see this in terms of Alexa. But the point being is that's cut off now, and a whole part of censorship, which doesn't necessarily fit into our legislation per se, although it could be considered indecent, is pushed upon us. So I don't think as a small economy or small set of economies that we can really protect ourselves unless we adopt a form of the internet. And that's why I'm very big on something like blockchain technologies and the freedom that could bring in terms of having a platform outside of the internet. It makes it easier if you had a Caribbean blockchain, which I'm not trying to endorse them, but BIT and those guys are trying to work on. That can somewhat lead us to a model where we're totally independent and we can deal with net neutrality, all of that stuff, if it works. But as it stands right now, we have no control.
Dr. Brum, you wanted to respond?
Generally, I don't think we have to fear what the Europeans or the Americans are doing. They're looking after their own interests. And when we start to talk about democracy and civil society, we have to ask ourselves what it is that we are going to protect. What is it that we hold sacred, that we want to preserve? Now, the United States, its back is against the wall, literally. It's trying to stop the radicalization going on. Europe is facing that same problem, for example, France and the UK. And you're now seeing the counter-radicalization of, well, if this religious group can get to us, well, we're going to start something very similar now. So you've seen the first act taking place there. Within the Caribbean, we have not been agitating in a way where we have that much to be fearful of. As I showed you, we still tend to use the internet for entertainment purposes. It has not stopped commercial activity. You can still do that as much as you want. There are other things that will stop us from developing e-commerce and other commercial business activities. So I don't think we have to be worried towards that at all. What was the other part of your question that you were concerned about? Because you were quite long.
I was regarding it in terms of monopolization, kind of, because everybody has a blog and they can easily do them, but all those blogs are hosted on either Facebook or...
Well, we have stopped that with our own form of self-censorship. Within our libel laws or slander laws, for example, we have to host several of our websites outside because we don't have the legislation. For you to be truly democratic and to be important, they can easily trace who you are. So it's not the Europeans stopping us from being outspoken and voicing our views. Our own societies are very restrictive in their own ways.
All right. Just to follow up on that, so with the Arab Spring, the tools that brought about the Arab Spring came about because even after networks were shut down by the governments, they used resources such as anonymization resources such as the Tor ring. They used various proxies to get help to Twitter. They used various applications, WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, which allowed encryption of their communications, and therefore they couldn't scan it to stop it from going out. These applications are all under attack. There is a rumor that over 98% of what was Tor is now actually an FBI honeypot, which means that it's the FBI looking at communications. If we are outside the Caribbean, and even though we still use WhatsApp as if it were a religion in most cases, how are we going to feel when they are being cracked down outside so that other governments, yes, it's not our government, but it's other governments looking at it, particularly because we have one of our closest big neighbors saying, next time you all go in line for a visa, please put down every single social media application that you use, because we are going to read every single post. And by the way, we're going to get the post that you deleted.
Next comment, question. Yeah.
My question is for Krystal.
Bitch, Krystal.
My name is Ashel Ford. I am the chairman of the Barbados IGF Steering Committee. Sorry. Krystal, I want to know more about what moved you to come. Oh, there are two of them?
Yes.
Krystal Howell. I want to know what moved you to bring the Auditor General's report to the average Barbadian. I want to know if it was more than just, because I think that we all fed up, or at some point we were all fed up. So, but we didn't all take to social media. So I wanted to know what specifically moved you to do that, and a little bit more about how it was received, how, if you were surprised by the result that you got.
As I would have mentioned before, I forgot I need a microphone. As I would have mentioned before, the bodies that I was a part of, they have been speaking on the Auditor General's report for years, and the response was not favorable. You would get some feedback, but in a room like this, where there's a limited number of persons and everybody that's in the room already knows about the report, and they're going to go away and not do anything with the information. I found that I think young people actually, and I consider myself young, I'm not under 25, but I do think I'm young. I think that we have a passion and an energy that is very difficult to ignore, as much as the traditional media does not pick up on the positive aspects of that. I see how hard young people hustle, how much they make sure their voice is heard. And the other difficulty I had is with the fact that there's so many Barbadians that they are not educated in this area, and this is not to say that they are poorly educated. I am uneducated in the area of geography, science, and other aspects. That does not mean I'm...
We do classes together.
I did not take it anywhere past a CSC level to say that I can be an expert speaker on any of these topics and be able to expound in a way that, you know, I won't sound like a basic person. I wanted to make sure, though, that for something that was so important because of the education that I have, I wanted to make sure that other people understood how critical it was. And it takes a lot, because I would have called multiple people, including this person on my right, to find out if they thought this would have been a medium that would have been received, because I see other people using it and other people being successful, but I consider myself basically a nobody. I did not have an active social media life. I did not have Instagram, Twitter, anything of the like. I just had Facebook and barely used it. So I did not think that I would get the response that I did. But I heard so many people calling out and complaining about things and did not see the connection between what they were complaining about and the issues in the Auditor General's report, especially with regards to the wastage, the lack of collection on outstanding receivables, and a multitude of alternatives to the things that have been pushed even in the recent budget, where you're given the impression that you only have two options, taxes or go home. And I'm here sitting down saying, those are not the only two options. How could you be pushing something like this? And the reason they could push something like this is because the public does not understand there are more options, and they're going to accept it. And the more when I got the success that I have, it was shocking. I received over 40,000 views on the video. I've had a multitude of persons messaging me saying they didn't know this information before. They were voting and believing that what the ministers at the time would have said is truth, and they're glad to see that some person was able to bring additional information to change their viewpoints and to change their stances. So I use this as an encouragement to let people know you can use social media to make a difference or make a change. I was not expecting in such a short period of time such a significant change. And I don't expect miracles to say that I can change the landscape of Barbados. But what I am hoping is that with continued effort, that can start to change, that people can realize they do have a voice, they do have reason. There are reasons why things are the way that they are, and there's somebody who is willing to take it and bring it to them on a level where they will be able to understand that information.
So, Mr. Moderator, I'm curious. Yes, young people can change things, of course. But I want to know from the activists, what are you changing to? I want to know, for example, what is in the Auditor General's report. I am going to play dumb this morning. What is in it? What are the issues, for example, that we need to get rid of or to implement? What are they? Can anyone enlighten me?
Dr. Moore?
Well,
No,
from my
no. The forum is on internet democracy, internet activism, democracy, and economics. Part of the process is that in a democracy, we're not just going to be talking about change. The frustration, for example, that we are being faced with is after you've activated, do you intend to change anything? And what do you intend to change it to? If the Auditor General's report is such diatribe, do we intend to get rid of the office of the Auditor General? Is that what we want to change to? Do we want to alter the powers of the Auditor General? Let me continue. Furthermore, I lecture public policy. Public policy, for example, when you're involved in public policy is not something that you wake up a morning,
Dr.
for
Broom?
example. I am aware.
Excuse me. The panel, just so I'm clear, is
Yeah.
actually about how the internet is being used for activism.
No.
It's about the internet. This is the Internet Governance
Yes,
Forum.
yes, it is, but the topic is internet activism, democracy, and economics.
Yes. So how
Therefore,
the
it's
internet
open
is
to
being used
interpretation, not so? It's open to interpretation.
Okay,
See.
so we're going to
Right.
have our next question now.
All right. Hold. All right.
I think that the confusion on my face is mirrored in the audience because no one was giving the impression that you would do anything to bring down the Auditor General office. Furthermore, I think they need a bigger voice. And I think that the traction that we're getting, even in the traditional media, you have seen more than ever before persons bringing out issues in that report and asking for it to be addressed. So
Right, all right. And we did expect this panel to get spicy, all right? So, this is not, right, so what I want to do, Jeremy, just before we take your question, because I want to give Krystal number 2 and Mr. Salt, he's here to add a little salt to the panel. I just wanted to ask them, before we get to your question, Jeremy, do you think that those in positions of power are actually taking internet activists, young people seriously, and that's specifically to Krystal Hoyt and to Mr. Bellamy.
Repeat your question. Sorry about
Right.
that.
So do you think that those in positions of power, whether it be politicians, whether it be business leaders, are they taking, because you said young people are on the internet and so on, they're on Twitter, and Dr. Broom asked the question, well, what is the purpose of this internet activism? Do you see politicians in your role as youth parliamentarian and as the vice president of the National Youth Council, are your leaders taking you and the young people who you lead seriously?
Are the leaders, not necessarily my leaders, are the leaders taking it seriously? And I definitely say no, for the simple fact that if, well, they don't take much seriously, but if they had taken anything seriously, primarily youth and youth issues, then policy that affect young people will have an input on, young people will have a voice for. They would be looking to young people to assist in certain things. We have a youth policy that says that defines young people as our most precious asset, and that is not reflected in the policies that they create. So I definitely said they're not taking young people seriously.
Yeah. Mr. Bellamy?
You want a long answer or a short answer? The answer is no, though. You're not taking internet activists seriously, but not to get too general or away from the conversation. I think that's more a reflection of how they care about anything going on in the society, and not necessarily a slight on the internet activists. But I think that the internet activists can be taken more seriously once they start to see changes being made and results and people actually getting up and moving.
Jeremy is saying no, but let me get to the other Jeremy first, quickly. Yeah.
Hey, okay, firstly, I really want to thank Jeremy and Krystal. I generally follow you guys. I mean, except when Jeremy got that awful blue shirt, but I mean, apart from that.
Chelsea?
Yes, Chelsea shirt, yes. Because Jeremy and Krystal are able to break points down in a way that the average person, a layman, can understand. And that is really, really appreciated. And when I speak to people on the streets, I mean, and people will forward your posts and stuff on, on other forms of social media, right? So it's much appreciated. You made a point earlier about, I guess, it's net neutrality. And, sorry, I'm Jeremy Jones, and I'm representing Internet Society Barbados chapter. And one thing I will say is that the Internet Society Barbados chapter will provide a forum, a means for us to push back on certain things. So as much as you speak, pardon? Yeah, they spoke about it last week. I do know that, yes. Yeah, so that is a challenge. But once again, as in your sessions, I mean, people post questions and, the conversations evolve. So feel free to use the Internet Society. Use us, lean on us. We have, there's a ton of resources. And the Computer Misuse Act is old. I mean, followed the Budapest Convention, but, that convention itself is ever evolving, and we have not evolved with it. So, as I said, use us, and let's push back on the powers that be. And I believe it will be for the greater good in the long run.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. All right. We have very limited time, and I wanted to, all right, quickly, David.
David Smith, also with the Internet Society. I wanted to raise the point that I don't know if it is the Internet activists who are causing it, or if it is a reflection of Donald Trump's alternative means of reaching the public. But I've noticed that we now have local politicians who are also taking to Facebook in various forms and fashions to put out their own ideas. So I suspect it is very much a reflection of the work you guys are doing and the impact that's being made. Maybe, maybe not, but I'd be...
So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to ask, well, we have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask the panelists to give some closing remarks. And I know Jeremy was hitting back against Krystal. Not hitting back, but countering what Krystal was saying, probably because he has had a different experience. So I'm going to let him.
You guys even beginning to know. Look, internet activists have an impact, but it's about where you hit. When you get threats, when you begin to get threats, I can say this in here because Krystal knows about it. When you start getting certain threats sent to you, then start telling me that internet activists ain't got something. It's about profile. Salt was correct. Patrick was correct with respect to not listening to everybody. If you manage to inculcate or create an image where people follow, and the worst thing you could ever do for me is say Jeremy Stevenson and they get back to a politician. Because unfortunately, it results in the politician either thinking that I am openly opposing them as opposed to the policy. A lot of what goes on in Barbados is personalized as opposed to intellectualized. We are an anti-intellectual society, progressively more so than ever. So the way that you become effective is to become the intellectual, not just to become a person making noise, and there's an art to it. So if young people want to really, and let me, for the instance of why Jason brought up under 25 here, not characterize myself as a young person despite being a millennial. If young people want to be the internet activists that affect change in Barbados, it calls for something called organization. In other words, it doesn't have to come through a body. It just has to come through persistence. I've been at this outside of social media for 7 years, and it's only this year I started getting the threats. So change ain't gonna happen. Salt has been on the radio since 2010, 7 years. I'm quite sure right now, if he does another R. Jones joke, because I know that's the fastest one to come out is most I remember, a R. Jones joke, right? If he does one, I am quite sure he will get a response because he's been at it for such a while that it can be seen as an influencer. So the main thing is persistence. That is how you do it. Arab Spring happened because it was violent. If you want change in the Caribbean, we don't necessarily want violence, but you need persistence, and then you'll be influential.
Thank you, Jeremy. And to Dr. Broom, I'm going to give you 20 seconds. And I know you've been asking, what change do you want to see? So I'm going to ask you to give some, as the foremost intellectual on the panel, how the strategy, how can someone like Krystal Hoyt help to bring about such change?
I think we have to go back to first principles. If we look at all the social movements that were taking place, they were just not agitating because they can. They were agitating to bring about institutional changes in order to bring about a better livelihood for the different groups they were agitating for. When we look at our society today, are we just agitating for bread and butter issues? Okay, so we want lower taxes because we think there are too many. And as we get lower taxes, we dissipate. It's not an issue any longer. Or are we agitating, for example, for larger economic changes, fundamental changes to the economy? When we look at agitation, the frustration being expressed by young people, for example, are we agitating for changes to the structure of government where young people now have an institution that they can be elected to to voice their opinions, for example, where there is a new institution where their views are heard within Parliament so that they can now help to effect change? Or are we just going to hear what they have to say, write it up in a report, and you can say, well, yes, but these are the proceedings of our agitations, for example. When we're agitating, for example, or the activism, what is it that fundamentally we want change in our society? I have no problems with people being empowered, but to what end? And it must have an end point, or else what we're doing online is no different to what we were doing over the years. We don't do anything online that we don't do in person. It's just a transfer and a new method of doing things. So when we hear all of this about change and being all these people following us, let's do a dissection of the people that are following. Is it for the greater good, or are they sectional interests looking to pursue their own hidden agendas for a select group? So we have to be able to strip a lot of the fanfare and the fame that several people are craving and ask, what is all of this for?
Thank you, Dr. Broom. Thank you very much. Quickly to Krystal, what change do you want to see in 10 seconds, and how would your young people bring about that change?
Well, I definitely want to see change as it relates to tokenism. Young people are invited to different events, and we say young people were there, we say that we listen to young people, but we don't really take young people seriously. Young people could be as persistent as Jeremy wants them to be. Young people are not taken seriously in the country. Young people are not seen as anything, we don't add to the table, we are seen only as a problem. So I want the young people to be taken more seriously, one, and two, I don't want any more tokenism, because that is the root of the problem, where we just want young people to have a seat at a table, but we don't want young people to say anything, to be seen and not to be heard.
All right, Patrick. So, quickly. What can be done to,
I think that we boast a lot in Barbados of how high our literacy rate is. I think that we got information coming from other sources. What we need to do is to think more critically as Barbadians, see the information, gather the information, take the information for what it is, and then make a decision on what's not. So once everybody talking, once you can figure out who talking sense and who ain't talking sense, then we will see change coming about, because then we will know who to listen to. That's all I got to say on that.
Krystal, final word from you.
I would just close out by saying that I would like persons not to be discouraged by those who would want to quiet your voice, especially if you are able to influence persons to make better decisions. It is not one person that can make a change in Barbados, and if you look to more open-minded countries, activism plays a very critical role in terms of bringing about change. So if your voice can be multiplied by the thousands and can make a difference to how things are done, it is a different method. It is not the same as if I go into a room and speak to persons. I am exposing the information to thousands of persons who might actually be able to make a bigger change or impression than even myself. There is no limit to the number of persons that you can influence if you speak out. And if you're sure that the information that you are sharing is something that can add value to persons' lives.
All right, thank you very much to all of our panelists. And just to Krystal, we didn't invite you here this morning as a tokenistic measure. The Internet Society, I can guarantee you, welcomes the voice of young people. And we are here to help you strategize for that change you want to see. So thank you, Dr. Broom, Jeremy Stevens, Krystal Howell, Patrick Salt Bellamy, and Krystal Hoyt. Ladies and gentlemen, over to our next panel on internet activism and gender.
And thank you, Jason, for moderating the panel.